It's live.
All
It's
right.
real live.
Word. Hey everybody, Platinum Cast here. We want to tell you all about the beautiful world that is Shitty Goblin Slayer.
Wrong.
Hosted by
Very wrong.
BMK and Lemmy Dono.
Yes, you have BJMK and Lemme Dono over here, and today we have a special guest. How you want to introduce yourself?
What's up, guys? I'm Zimzilla. I am a YouTube channel. I typically just do kaiju, Godzilla, tokusatsu related content. However, I also like anime, and one of my favorite anime of this recent year is Goblin Slayer.
Yeah, he's here to tell us why Goblin Slayer is a worthwhile watch, and we're gonna see who was right in the end. But
We all
really,
know it's me.
yeah, I mean, really, it's just mostly to see like the pros and cons of the show. But I can't see a really good pro. But
Oof.
definitely check out this man Zenzilla here and give him a like if you ever see him in his videos.
Thank
No
you.
further ado, let's start it off. Let's see. Let's start with the obvious thing. Why is there so much edge in this show?
Why is there so much edge? I think like the fact is that looking at other series, I don't think there's this amount of kind of like rolling down kind of epic start. Not even really epic, just kind of dark start to a series. I think the closest one, which we're going to probably be comparing a lot to, is Berserk. However, that's only in the manga adaptation. It really gets that dark. However, comparing both the animes, they both have a similarly dark, depressing tone. However, I think Goblin Slayer's sets its tone a lot more kind of gruesome, as well as it also sets up stakes better, in my own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're actually gonna get into like the first episode and everything, we are set up to first the Adventurers Guild, so we understand where kind of the hub area of this world will be taking place. We understand what adventures are. We understand how a quest system works, where they get quests from the Adventurers Guild, and then we start off on a quest. So for anyone who understands fantasy to agree, like Dungeons and Dragons, Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, Skyrim, Oblivion, anything like that, you
Mm-hmm.
understand the basic structure of a quest in itself. So when they finally get to this dungeon, they're going in. Um, we start to see a little bit of the character traits with all these people, like the swordsman, the fighter, the sorceress, and then obviously the priestess. Um, we get to see how they react against goblins in the first fight here. However, obviously things turn really bad, and we see the flaws in some of their strategies where the sorceress gets killed because of kind of she gets a little scared. Things go wrong. Her staff gets broken, and then she gets killed. The fighter goes in kind of swinging hack and slash, doesn't really know what he's doing. He
Right.
uses a long weapon, which actually, for anyone who plays D&D and a lot of the older editions of D&D, if you use weapons like long swords, spears, pikes, anything like that, you actually couldn't use them in caves properly. So that's something that's carried over from traditional tabletop RPGs, which this series has a lot of motifs and ideas lifted from. So I think that's a nice touch if you understand the fantasy genre, like a lot of its trope aspects.
Uh-huh.
And then we see the end with a fighter who also gets killed as well. And I think what's interesting about like what happens to her, not exactly like what happens to her, but how it happens, where she just gets completely overpowered. I think it's interesting because it shows that despite her strength and her abilities, um, against just brute strength and in an area that she's unfamiliar with, she just gets completely destroyed. Which, one thing I should point out to anyone who's gonna read the manga or just watches the anime, all of the characters who died in the first episode actually had backstories in the manga chapters, so we actually see what happened to each of these characters in their past. So for the sorceress, we understand she was top of her class in the academy where she went to go learn her spells. The swordsman was kind of grew up on these tales of adventurers, and the fighter actually was trained by her grandfather, and that's why she wanted to become an adventurer, was to honor him and his style. So
Well, hold on one second. Let's actually focus on the Well, you can chime in with the manga parts, but let's focus on what the anime was.
the anime does,
Didn't they
yeah.
gloss over? Didn't they gloss over some of the backstories? Just like, well, it was like one flash scene or something like that for each.
Yeah, they just had small flash scenes, yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get at, because in terms of like what you're saying about their backstories, the anime didn't bother giving us any of that. What I remember seeing in episode 1 is a group of adventurers who were confident in their first get quest against the mediocre goblins were able to just go off and on their own. And then, like you said, they failed. They had the wrong weapons. They were just unprepared for what was awaiting them. And when they finally meet the goblins, they get decimated. And I think one or two of them either get raped, or one of them gets raped and the other one dies. And the way
one gets killed, one of them gets raped, and
that's what
one
I
of them
mean.
just gets outright killed as well.
Right.
It's the fighter gets raped, sorceress just gets killed, and fighter gets killed.
Right. And I'm just like, first we didn't like, if we had a more of a backstory, maybe we would connect with them. But even with that backstory, none of them became relevant later on. I'm not sure if in the manga they decided to circle back to these characters, but they definitely weren't relevant later, because all we focused on was the one priestess who became Goblin Slayer's sidekick.
I think the one thing that became relevant with the adventurers was how the priestess saw the Goblin Slayer, because we actually kept on seeing flashes of what happened to the adventurers in the cave over the other episodes, because I know the episode where after Goblin Slayer, the other group of adventurers that I think we'll talk about later on, so the archer, shaman, all those guys,
right,
when priestess thinks that Goblin Slayer's gonna kill the elf who's chained up, she gets the flashback to when he killed the sorceress, because he thought that using antidote on her wouldn't work because she would have died or suffered already, so he's gonna put her out of her misery. So she thinks he's gonna kill him, so there's relevancy there, as well as when the priestess is talking to the sword maiden while she's taking her bath. She also has flashbacks again to what happened, and she puts a lot of importance on the fact that if it wasn't for Goblin Slayer, she would have ended up like them. And the mistakes as well as the fate of all of those adventurers is definitely something that weighs heavy on the priestess, and something that carries with her throughout the rest of the series until obviously the end of the series. So I think that's important in that regard, where they aren't exactly relevant in the case where it's like, oh, we will always remember their names. They were always characters that we love, but it's more like less. This is an example of what happens when you go into places unprepared and you're fighting monsters, which I think adds a little bit of kind of realism and immersion to the fact that even though these are obviously small goblins, and the series time and time again tells us that we shouldn't underestimate goblins, it serves as a really solid reminder that that's what happens when you underestimate goblins.
Right. And that's something I actually do appreciate about the show, I'm not going to lie. When we see Goblin Slayer after the first episode, you clearly understand that this man understands how the world of Goblin operates. He understands that if you fight goblins, you need to have certain weapons with you. You can actually ambush them. You can't just blindly fight them with brute force, especially when it comes to goblin champions who are dominant in brute force in most scenarios. But in addition, you have to understand that when fighting goblins or any let's say RPG game, you can't hope that everything just turns out okay. You have to prepare yourself for any situation. If you know you're going to be fighting a ton of archers, you can't just go right down the middle path. You're probably going to get wrecked by those arrows, right? So what Goblin Slayer does, and I think he did this either episode 2 or 3, we start seeing how he does sieges on other locations. So I think he was attacking a goblin fortress once.
Yeah, it was the ruins that the goblins had taken over.
Right. And instead of just blindly attacking them, he actually took advantage of the priestess's abilities. And I think he set the whole castle ablaze, and he used the priestess wall of protection, which was meant for defense, as a barricade to block them in and let them all burn to death. So he wasn't just blindly rushing in. He actually had a plan set up. And that's something I think is his best quality. And later in the series, he even admits, I'm not a professional. Everything I've learned, everything I do is something I've learned from somebody else. And I appreciate characters in general who have that quality. It's like, I'm not just gonna be some self-centered jerk. I'm not gonna it's like, how can you do this? Because I'm Goblin Slayer. No. I want you to have an actual reasoning. You're not Batman.
Yeah. Even I think in a way also he has some comparisons to Batman in terms of motivation. However, I think he's more believable than Batman in that sense, where he was trained to fight certain things, in Batman's case criminals, and in Goblin Slayer's case goblins. However, I think his progression and how he thinks up strategy comes off as more kind of believable in a sense than Batman, who is like, oh, I have contingency plan for everything because I'm Batman.
The reason why I refer to Batman is because he had the character Batman himself has a tendency to have the reader believe anything he throws at them, like what the comic book logic, and it's enough to say because he's Batman, he's able to solve a scenario or understand how to fight a person or whatever. In terms of Goblin Slayer, it's more likely that, okay, because he's had so much experience in terms of the training he's had, or the amount of fortresses he's attacked, or the amount of battles he's been in, with whether it's been goblins or not goblins, that's what made it more believable, as you said before. And go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was thinking like actually another thing about Batman is that I think a really interesting kind of case is comparing how Batman fights Darkseid to how Goblin Slayer fights the ogre in the episodes and like comics or the anime. Because in the case of Goblin Slayer, what Goblin Slayer does, it backfires on him terribly. He almost gets himself killed by because he tries to slash at the ogre's legs, take him down, try to deliver a killing blow, and then the ogre just turns around and smacks him and
he actually
smashes him in a pillar. While compared to how Batman's fought Darkseid in numerous comics, where it's almost like Batman's like, oh yeah, I knew he was gonna do that. I know he's gonna do this. Yeah.
That's actually funny that you bring that up. That's my favorite episode of the series or of the season.
I had a big problem with the episode though. I felt with when he you guys talking about the episode with the ogre, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It felt like he just had that special weapon just to save his ass at the end. I thought that was kind of bullshit.
The teleportation scroll.
Scroll.
Yeah, I thought that was really. I wasn't really a big fan of that. How he's just like, oh, I have this, and then uses it, and then he wins. I thought it was kind of like a cheap cop out.
I think like in a way it could be seen as that. However, I think once again you have to kind of have. I think like to the average viewer that makes sense that people would be like, oh, that's kind of cheap. He just had that obvious thing. However, with scrolls in general in fantasy, they work the exact same way as they do in Goblin Slayer, where you can put any kind of spell in these scrolls, and then once you unravel those scrolls, you can just use the spell regardless of it. I think actually Skyrim's a pretty good example of this, where you can use master or expert level destruction spells even though you have like low level destruction magic,
right?
And I think that like it's like a nod to like people who like fantasy, and I think that people wouldn't expect that to be what he used, because people would be like, oh wow, he just uses a big like reflection or a big fireball. But no, when it's like, oh, he actually used a teleportation crystal instead of an outright offensive spell, and
right?
Put part of him in the bottom of the ocean. And I think the spell itself was really interesting in that regard, as well as how it uses scrolls. Because I think that overall, Goblin Slayer's magic system is probably one of the best thought out, and once again, pays a lot of homage to fantasy in that regard.
I do, but the thing, my problem is that like he literally waited to after like he got wrecked to use the scroll. So it felt like it was just like, why don't you just use the beginning when he was fighting ogre?
Because he only used it once.
He could only use it once, as well as he also wanted to try it out on a nest as well. And it actually speaks more to his inexperience with other monsters, because he didn't know. He obviously was like, that's not a goblin. How he fights it like a goblin, and he gets wrecked for it. So then he realizes, oh, I'm gonna have to use this, see if it works. And there's obviously there's a theme of trust that gets built out throughout the series, and it culminates in the last episode, as well as luck. And I think that him putting the trust and having luck that spell would work in the way it does, it speaks to that motif that we see throughout the series.
And you're not wrong about that, because the reason why I was such a fan of this episode is, well, two reasons. We're learning in that episode, we're seeing how a Goblin Slayer uses his tools. He learns that, okay, I want to try poison now, I want to try sleep, I want to try using the protection spells, and it's like he's testing out different ways to kill goblins through trial and error, and he's seeing things like the scroll, whether or not they're effective. And while he's doing this, we're learning that the other adventurers who are with him aren't used to this, so they're coming in with the same amount of knowledge as us, the viewers. They're like, okay, this is new to us. How would we go about it? And Goblin Slayer is pretty much giving them the layout of how he thinks about fighting goblins, right?
As well as also the overpoweredness of the scroll was kind of set up, especially with the camp scene, because when the high elf archer mentions that it was a magic scroll, the shaman also says how even a child could use whatever scroll was inside, and that it was only used once. So we knew that A, we wouldn't be seeing the scroll again, but B, whatever he was using, it was overpowered, because he obviously tells her not to touch it because of how dangerous it was. Okay. So we obviously knew he had something in his back pocket. However, I think like even as a strategist, even if people say like, oh, why would you hold back from the beginning? It's like, if you hold back from the beginning, you can test something out and you understand what your limits are and what the
Right.
limits of your opponent is. And by going in all out, sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. Because, for example, if you're not strong enough or you don't have the endurance and you go all out, you can get completely decimated in a fight.
Yeah,
So I think that
I was gonna
holding out
connect
was
that.
a better idea than just kind of going in there with just the scroll.
Right. I was gonna connect it to boxing, for example. If you actually are in a ring, you have to go for like what 12 rounds. You can't
Yeah.
just
Pace yourself.
you can't go all out in round one unless you really plan on knocking that person out.
Yeah, like you have to be like Mike Tyson to like go all out round one.
Exactly.
Because that was actually a problem with Mike Tyson was that he had terrible stamina.
Right.
However, he had an amazing knockout rate compared to like someone like Muhammad Ali.
Exactly. Muhammad Ali was able to go for like almost every single round.
Yeah.
But before I forget, the reason I love this episode so much was because while this was an ogre filled episode, he still manages to refer to goblins at the end of the battle with the goblin. After he reveals the teleportation scroll and unleashes a flood on the ogre, this man goes up to the decimated ogre who has lost all 4 of his limbs, and he looks at him in the eye. And he's like, "Goblins are tougher than you." And I'm like, how much salt can you have? Like, really? This man got one shot and unconscious. And you really want to tell me goblins are tougher than you? I don't care what your backstory is, but I was laughing so hard because I'm like, you still managed to make yourself a goblin slayer. Like, damn. He's like, you are not on their level. You're not as bad as what a goblin lord or a goblin champion. I'm like, God damn it, bro. You can't be like this every episode.
I also laughed at that too. That was so funny. As well as how the scene's supposed to be viewed as like really epic. It really made me laugh.
Yeah.
One of my problems with this show though is how it doesn't have a central tonal theme for like, and it's episodic, and those two, they don't, it doesn't, when both of those are lacking, it's hard for me to get invested because for one, they don't, it's about goblins, right? But there's not really an overarching villain that's actually compelling. There's not really a overarching story that's going on. It's just random missions where they're going on killing goblins. But then also so I'm like, okay, I get that. I watch Baki, and it's not really like a deep storyline. It's about just some guy there's a bunch of fights, right?
Mhm.
But yet it somehow keeps entertained because it is consistent in what it's going for. You know, every episode you're gonna get a fight. You know, every episode like it's gonna go for this thing that it was presented in episode 1. We get presented with a lot of different things in episode 1 of Goblin Slayer, but then it just switches up and doesn't even stick to that. It doesn't feel consistent because now we get like a bunch. It's like 60% of the anime is like goblin slaying, right, or going on missions, and then the other 40% is just them sitting around like feels like filler beach day episodes from Bleach. So
I agree with that because we had that one episode where they were all trying to come together in a drink, and I thought, okay, maybe it's lead to something else. But literally, the whole 20 minutes of that episode was just them sitting down and drinking, and that was it. I'm like, why are we watching an episode of this? We can literally just cut that down to 5 minutes and then go on another mission, or even try to develop these characters. We didn't learn anything in a lot of these episodes.
we didn't learn anything about the characters that we didn't know. It didn't really add anything to the story, if though there's not a story to add to. But like, it's just like, why is this here?
And my one of my biggest issues with the show is they actually no, before I go into anything else, they have no names.
Oh yeah,
they have no names. It took me like 3 episodes to figure that out.
that's a big problem for me too. Like, I can't. It's already bad enough. The main character is very monotone. Exactly, he doesn't really have much of a personality besides goblins, and we don't even see his face, which like. It's hard for me to build some attachment towards him, especially if we don't have a name, we don't see his face, and
you're so straightforward.
He's so straightforward without really much a personality, and we get like what is not even a 10-minute, maybe not even 10-minute backdrop on his why he hates goblins, and it's basically boils down to like, oh, they killed his
sister,
village, I think. Sister, and like raided his village or whatever.
I think they raped his sister too, or
whoever. They raped his sister, killed her friends, killed the entire village, raped the women, and so on.
Yeah.
So it's like, it feels like just like, okay, yeah, it was like, let's think of something edgy and like, yep, that's his backstory. That's why he hates goblins.
And that's one of the bigger issues I have because there's just a lack of tension, and they're trying to use edge as a form of tension. But I'm like, you guys can't do that. When shows like you were referring to before, like Berserk, if they do edge, it usually has a ripple effect later on. When I see it in Goblin Slayer, the edge is just meant for shock value, which only lasts for about a minute for me. Like when episode 1, when we lost, when that what's it called? Was it the fighter who got raped?
Yes, yeah, right. They just sent her away
to a monastery,
and then we find out. Well, we get another. They save another elf girl who was probably like raped and like tortured. And hanging up on a wall or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, she never we didn't get anything on that. And none of the main characters actually has something like done to them where it like changes the overall mood of the group or how they like respond to things.
Like the worst thing that's happened is probably the priestess pissing herself, and even then she was able to escape. She got her arm bitten into, I think, and then she managed to escape, and then she's all happy again. And I'm like, is it because you got to sleep with Goblin Slayer? and seeing how we're bringing that up now, like
his childhood friend, bro. His childhood friend is also like
she's all fan service.
She's literally there for tits, and it's like, why are you here?
And that's what makes me mad, because people like the priestess, she's there for lolly fan service. The big tit girls for the big tit fan service, and then you got the witch. The witch is the worst.
I hate the witch. She has the She always like pauses in between her sentences, and it like really irks me. It's like, why are you talking like that?
She's like, do you need some help from me? I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, it took you a good 3 minutes to do a sentence,
and every time she talks, it's like slow. It zooms in on the lips and the tits. It's just like, okay.
And I'm like, why is this so much of the show? Like, I can understand if you have fan service. A lot of animes do, but that should not be your main source of entertainment. Like, come on.
Yeah, I feel like, and also the fact that they didn't do any more. I'm not saying that I want to see more rape. I'm just saying like that's what they set up in the first episodes. This is usually when animes start with first episodes. They're like, it's like the foundation. This is what you see, and this is what you're gonna get. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so since it showed all those different things, I'm like, okay, we're gonna see a lot of this, but we really didn't. I didn't see a lot. I'm not saying I want to see more rape, but I'm saying it gave us a false like thing. People are like, oh, yo, people get raped in this show, probably crazy. But then when you actually watch the show, oh, we're actually just sitting down at the table drinking and eating meat
and being jolly
and then now we go to a goblin.
And now someone's getting raped.
But no one actually dies.
Not because really. No one essential dies.
No one essential, or even no one from the main party got like killed. So it's
and that's another issue I'm having, because like in episode 1, like you said, they did not do a solid job laying out the groundwork for the rest of the show. Like a show on Netflix, Castlevania, when we saw episode 1, we had the complete foundation of what the show was going to be like. We knew it was going to be medieval. We knew it was about fighting Dracula. We knew how we got to this point of present day. When I look at Goblin Slayer episode 1, all it told me was, you really like to use fan service, you really like to use edge, you want to make this man all about Goblin Slayer, and he's slaying goblins, and how his whole character is going to be him blunt, pissing people off, but that he's lovable because he doesn't mean to say what he says.
I mean, the first episode, like, I'm not gonna lie, it did caught me off guard, and it honestly was I feel like it was a decent setup. It was okay for what I was like. I can watch this, and then as I kept watching on, it just felt like this doesn't even feel like what it was. There's a few good episodes that were like, okay, I like this, but a lot of the episodes was like, this doesn't really feel like what I was shown from the first episode or what I expected to be delivered. You know, with Akame ga Kill, at least in Akame ga Kill, it's also kind of, I feel, a very edgy show, but at least they start killing off characters that are in the main cast, even though they don't really flesh out the characters enough for anyone to really care, but at least they, you know, they do kill off some characters from the main cast. If that's the type of story is presented, because that's the type of story I was like, oh, this is a story where you're going to get caught off guard and no one's going to be safe. You don't know who's going to get raped. You don't know who's going to get killed.
Right.
But then it's just like, yeah, I know no one's going to actually die once I got like a few episodes in.
And that's another issue. Like, we have a lot of lack of tension in terms of Akame ga Kill. At least they managed to do a good job with tension scenes. Whenever it came to Goblin Slayer, after like the first couple episodes, you kind of knew where they were going with the show.
Yeah. Well, the only times I kind of, there was a few times where I thought like, oh, yo, Goblin Slayer might get wrecked, because he was getting like really brutal. But then there's always that last minute save.
After the episode 4, I stopped believing he was gonna get wrecked. Like, there was the shaman who legit said he's gonna die.
Oh yes, and then they kind of like got retconned or like they just forgot it. I don't know. They
didn't forget it. He just survived. Like,
oh yeah,
the priestess, but the priestess, the priestess had to sleep with him because she's a virgin. They
resurrected him.
Then they resurrected him. And I'm just like, if you guys already knew he was going to get resurrected, then why bother bringing that up at all?
I think like, I get the floor now, right?
Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think with this series, of course, once again, I think going back to the concept of luck, I think it was like everything that kind of happens to those first set of adventures is bad luck because we first see the sorceress unlucky, she got scared, gets killed. Fighter unlucky to have fought a hobgoblin, as well as the fighter unlucky that he decided to swing a sword wildly and hit a rock, which gets him killed. And it's also lucky that the Goblin Slayer just happened to be hunting those exact same group of goblins. However, when we first see the Goblin Slayer, we understand that he's a lot more experienced because of obviously he's called Goblin Slayer, but we also see that as a silver rank adventurer, we were already told that silver ranks were the highest ranking adventurers that you would see in the field, so that there is a sense of safety now. However, now that we understand that there's safety in this situation with this silver ranked adventurer,
right
now we can see a lot more action. So now we see his tactics and how he got the rank of silver ranked adventurer. And this is a really good example of show instead of tell, because we see his strategy where he sees the longsword was bad for the cave, he picks up the spear.
Right.
The understanding that goblin blood's bad for weapons as well as armor. And he takes out the shaman, takes out the hob, and then kills the rest of the goblins, and then goes on to kill the goblin children, and says how he explains why he kills the goblin children, which actually that whole train of thought gets fulfilled at the end of the series.
Oh, yeah, I did like that
as well.
I did like that they didn't forget that because
exactly
what was it, the Goblin Lord, right?
The Goblin Lord, yeah, because he kills that one adventurer by pretending to be scared, and that's actually how he kept on surviving, was by pretending to be afraid and scared and then turning away and killing the people who trusted him. Going on to the next episode with the cowgirl, and I think that when I first found out that was her name, the fact that it was fans, the cowgirl, that's her name.
The redhead?
Yeah, the redhead.
Wow, that's a terrible name. Her name is Cowgirl.
Oh my god.
Yeah, exactly.
No love.
I don't understand why they just can't give them names.
Females get no love in this show, bro.
Because the reason they don't give you names is because in most campaigns, if some people don't even give characters names in campaigns, they'll just say, "Oh, this is so and so." No,
it's gonna be like God of War,
human paladin or stuff like that when you're doing a D&D campaign.
No, it's like God of War when he names his son. Why do you give your son a name when all you say is boy?
Oh yeah, boy.
But going on to the next episode with Cowgirl, we see what kind of connection he has. We don't really understand their past at first.
Yeah.
However, we understand where he lives now, what he does with the people who he's close to. So we understand his inner relationship and we understand his outer relationship. His inner relationship being with people who are close to him, like his Cowgirl and her uncle, and then we understand his relationship with people like adventurers.
Right.
Because when he goes in, we understand that people don't really like Goblin Slayer because of how he acts, how he holds himself, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then once again, we're treated to another goblin hunt, so we once again see a new phase of action. So we understand that based on the environment and the scenario that Goblin Slayer's in, we understand that he's able to be smart in these situations, as well as for the audience, we get to see a lot of different kind of skillful ways to kill goblins. And this is the first time we see protection used, as well as the first time we see protection used in a way that it wasn't meant to. Because actually, we don't even see protection used how it was meant to until 2 other episodes later against the ogre. Because we first see protection used to wall off the goblins and essentially suffocate them. And then the next time we see it is when it's used to block a fireball. And going back down to the magic system, I like the fact that all of the magics are used in ways that they don't break their own rules, in a sense. Excuse me. Because all cleric spells are used by invoking the name of their goddess, and all wizard spells are either used to invoke a different god sorceresses all recite their spells in Latin, because if you look at the ogre spell, the sorceress's spell, as well as the first sorceress who dies, all their spells are done in Latin, while the shaman is used in invoking the ancestors. So I like the fact that there's a lot of consistency there, which I think builds in terms of immersing the series for the audience. With when we're introduced once again to the new cast, so the cast of 3, we see how we once again see another perspective of how adventurers see Goblin Slayer. And I think over the course of this point onward, now that we have the group of adventurers, we see how it becomes less of just a world building story to now a character focused story. Because I think, like you guys said, you didn't really like Goblin Slayer because you didn't see his face as well as his kind of mannerisms. That's what you kind of felt, right? That he wasn't like a captivating character.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's better because we kind of see a blank slate character where very monotone, doesn't say much, and he has a certain kind of goal, which I think are the good basics to understanding a character. And how he behaves and how he acts as the series progresses shows his character development better than just kind of speaking and telling it. Sorry, I have a cold, but
No, you're fine.
Over the course of the adventures they go on, we see Goblin Slayer ask the adventurers to do more things with them. He asks them for weapons. In the case with the lizard shaman, he tells the dwarf to use more spells. He instructs the ranger to do these things. He trusts them more compared to how he was the first time, because he didn't even want them to go with him. He was just going to do it by himself, and he probably would have gotten killed because of it. So we because of that, actually that context clue helps audiences understand that despite his skill, he still needs help, even if he doesn't know it. And this building of trust keeps growing and growing until the final episode, where we see how he not only realizes his limits, he asks everyone for help. And then from that point, he actually planned the final battle with the Goblin Champion with the understanding that the priestess would probably not follow it exactly because she wanted to make sure he was okay as well. And
Lord, right?
Yeah, the Lord, sorry. Yeah, the Lord. And then finally, I think the best thing about the ending is actually how objectively far from the first episode it is, because I think it ends it on a way where we see Goblin Slayer as a kind of brooding, angry kind of character at the start to a character who's opened up. And I think the fact that he takes off his helmet in public, which he never does, and we see him smile at the end, and he says that he wants to be an adventurer. He understands that he's able to open up and he's able to move on from what people may consider a very basic trauma for a character motivation. But we've seen how he's grown through trusting people, through his mannerisms, his actions, everything like that. And I think this show is a very good example of show, don't tell in terms of how it developed its main character, because it very much is a character-driven story.
Right.
Even if like people may consider the character to be not that motivating. However, I think what it does and how it does it speaks more to that instead of how captivating of a character Goblin Slayer may or may not be.
I don't disagree that Goblin Slayer is a character-driven show, but I do disagree that they do a good job at showing it. Because in that one scene when Goblin Slayer makes the request that his farm is in danger and he needs all the adventurers to help him, and he actually bows his head, there was more camaraderie and character development for Goblin Slayer, in my opinion, in that one scene than the previous episode where they were all sitting together in a banquet and drinking and laughing together. I felt that was just a wasted episode, and the way they did the request scene was much better done, and that they actually showed that Goblin Slayer has no humility, has enough humility, or is able to toss away his pride to just say, "Hey, I'm in danger. My family's in danger. I really want to give you everything I can to make sure they survive." And that's
you're talking about episode 10, right? That's
10 or
the
11.
drinking episode, right? Yeah, because 11's
that was a waste of an episode in my opinion.
I also feel that
I will have to kind of agree with that, because I know externally that episode was done because of how they wanted to adapt those last 2 episodes. So that was actually a filler episode. So I will agree with that. That episode. Okay. Yeah, so I will agree. I will concede that point that episode kind of feels wasted because of the fact that it was actually being used to filler out the episode, because they wanted to adapt the last 2 episodes a lot better.
Right.
Okay. My thing with what you were saying about the character development, an empty cusk developing into another empty cusk is still an empty cusk. I feel like the only thing with Goblin Slayer, he's not the what my big problem is, yes, the development, yes, I see that there was a overblown portion of development for Goblin Slayer, but my problem is that he was not fleshed out. Like we don't really, besides the only thing like his past, besides learning that his past makes him want to kill goblins, that's all we learned really. And I feel like with Guts, all the past things that happened to him actually makes up all these different things about his character and how he interacts with other people.
Right.
Because of certain things that happened in the past is why he doesn't want anyone to touch him. He doesn't let anyone touch him. And then another certain things that happened in the past is why he doesn't want to form bonds with anyone because one of the closest people in his life betrayed him. So that's another thing.
More than once.
Yeah, more than once. And then we see that how he develops eventually when he does let someone touch him, but he still goes through some post-traumatic stress towards with that.
Right.
And that this is just like mad stuff, just like that really encapsulate his character and makes him who he is, where you can really feel. But with Goblin Slayer, it just doesn't feel fleshed out. It's just like my backstory, boom, and this is why this is the reason why I hate goblins. So I just hate goblins and goblins. That's it. It doesn't really explain why he's like, why is he so why is his social skills so subpar? Why is he so monotone? Why we don't really get a reason to why his character is like that. And the rest of the characters are even worse because they're literally just character tropes. Very one dimensional. They don't really have anything going for them. I don't even think we really learned any backstories for the main cast.
Right, you're either drunk, you're probably cocky, one character's shy, one character's hungry, like all the time.
Yeah, it's just like one dimensional tropes for each character, and I just feel like I really can't like. Yes, there's some good things, but I just really can't like really get behind this cast because there's not really much going on. The only one that really got a little bit going for was the priest and maybe Goblin Slayer, just with the development that he got throughout the series. But even with that, he's still pretty bland.
I think like to explain why Goblin Slayer's social skills are so subpar because you do know what we see him training too from the same age that he was born was after he leaves the village. You see him at the same age training, and I forget if the anime does explain this or not, whether like they say that he's been just training all his life, which is why his social skills are really bad.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think that's also the fact that near the end of the series we see him talking more, and it's always been inferred from the manga that that was a cause of the trauma that he experienced.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't remember if the anime does that or not, or explains that because of like the trauma that was happening to him, that he doesn't have that happen, like his doesn't talk as much.
They didn't actually go into that, but I do want to ask you a question since you read the manga. Was his teacher a goblin?
No, it's a Rhea.
It's a Rhea. What is that?
It's like another monster species. However, they're kind of sentient. So no, his teacher was not a goblin.
Okay, I was just curious.
Also, what's it called? I forget. How long was the Golden Age arc for Berserk? What manga number was it?
Golden Age arc was so like the Golden Age arc was like almost 100 chapters.
It was almost 100 chapters.
Pretty long.
Cause didn't it start like wasn't it like manga number 6 or 4?
It was chapter 4 when it started.
It was 4, and it ended like. Because I know that
ended on volume 13.
It ended volume 13.
Chapters, bro, didn't it?
No, Golden Age only had like 95 chapters. I think that but a lot of the things that was happening Guts affected him immediately after. Yeah. So it's like even though that is a long backstory, which gives you so much time to really like learn about Guts, all the bad things that happened to him were like immediately like brought up like right after, and it wasn't like just forgotten about.
Right, it all contributed to his latter character.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about Goblin Slayer in the sense of, do you think that he's being developed well in terms of the anime compared to the manga?
Compared to actually, interestingly enough, there are portions of the anime and the manga that were changed in terms of like what happened and what place they took in because you know the episodes where Goblin Slayer is teaching those two younger adventurers when they're trying to get the sword back.
Yeah. Oh yeah, with the club.
That's a different side. That's a whole different manga series. It was a different Goblin Slayer storyline.
Yeah.
So that never happened within the like main series of books. There was another quest they went on that doesn't happen at all in the anime, as well as there's a whole another storyline with an overarching villain that happens after the killing of the Goblin champion that isn't a goblin. So I'm not gonna spoil that. So there's a lot of more development that happens afterwards because they actually go on an adventure, as the High Elf Archer says, after the end of episode 12. So
Right.
I think like a lot of what happened between 1 through 12 in the anime is set up for the next season that they're going to be working on.
Yeah.
Because what happens to him then throughout the next series that they'll probably do is a lot different.
And actually, I am hoping for a season 2 because I do want to see Goblin Slayer acts as an adventurer rather than just a simple goblin exterminator.
Yeah, there's less goblins within the later chapters.
I would imagine so because they said he's going to be fighting new monsters and having real adventures as compared to doing sieges on fortresses and such. But what I wanted to know is, do you think that Goblin Slayer is a good enough character as he is in season 1? Because I know you've read further on, but the way you've seen the anime, and I'm only focusing on the anime right now. Do you think that they that he's a good enough character?
In context of would you be asking me like compared to other anime characters or in terms
Because
of what the material was itself?
We're comparing him to Berserk right now, right? So
just
like,
the guts.
in terms of like not just, Guts as a whole, but more like actually there's a Guts character in
That dude,
Heavy Swordsman.
The Heavy Sword. Oh, I hate that's his name. But anyways,
but either that's his name or it might be something else. I'd have to look that up again.
I'm sure the other name would be just as bad, bro. But I want to just ask. So I want to ask: do you think Goblin Slayer is a well-developed character? Because we've been talking about how Guts' backstory always affects his later character, but in terms of Goblin Slayer, we're just giving a blank slate, and even though he had a traumatic event, everybody else seemed to made to fill in the blanks for his character. Like people will justify what he does as being innocent, or he doesn't really mean it, or he's actually kind of nice, or whatever. If you need all these other characters to fill in your backstory, rather than you actually contributing to your own character, or even your trauma contributing to your character, does that really make you a strong character?
I think in terms of what he does, because all he does is slay goblins, and his trauma is based off of goblins, and because we know that the goblins are a threat that's probably never going to go away, it's almost like he's never going to be able to recover from his trauma. And if he'd never met the characters that he met, he would never have gotten out of that trauma. Comparison to Guts, however, because the fact is that if Guts ever gets the ability or the strength to kill Femto, his trauma is going to be gone. Like a lot of weight that's been on his shoulders is going to be gone. In comparison to Goblin Slayer, where it's a world where his enemy isn't just a singular entity, it's a group, a race.
Right.
And by having to fight like it's essentially like fighting a dictator versus fighting an idea. You can't kill an idea, but you can kill a dictator who proposes an idea.
Right.
And similarly to how goblins rape and pillage and kill, the idea of what goblins are, what kind of problem they cause, is going to keep pervading throughout the world until they're gone. However, it's almost impossible. So it also kind of speaks to the fertility of his actions. And people who are experiencing trauma will do things that may not make a lot of logical sense. However, it is their way of coping. Right. So I think it's good because it shows that he's taking action he's taking revenge.
Uh-huh.
And he's going through that stage of grief, which could be described as anger, or he could have moved on entirely, and he just feels that this is the only thing he knows how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that having a reader wonder about certain things, but have it shown in a way that makes a lot of sense, is a good writing strategy, in my opinion, because I feel like I know that there's going to be in Berserk. I know that there is going to be some build up. Guts will face Femto at some point. How they choose to have that happen, whether it's through a battle, through words, or whatever, that confrontation at some point, whenever Miura decides to do that exactly, will happen. In comparison to Goblin Slayer finally killing all the goblins, that's never going to end. Considering how Goblin Slayer is just one person.
I have to disagree because I feel like with Guts, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I also disagree with one single part. With Guts, his it's not just Femto. It's literally like a bunch of demons that he's getting vengeance for his comrades, because there's so many people that got murked, and a lot of people that he cared about got killed by not just Femto. Yes, it's a single entity that Femto was
the catalyst.
Yes, the catalyst of it. But there's a bunch of demons that you actually see Guts slaying.
Yeah, like the first one he kills was the one who killed Corcus.
Yeah. The first one he killed Corcus, and then even I think the Count was even in
the Count killed Pippin.
Yeah, Count killed Pippin. So I mean, there's monsters that were killing his friends, and
I agree with that too. However, I think the context of Guts as a character, because what Guts is someone who obviously that causality is a big part of Berserk.
Right.
The fact that Guts escaped the eclipse meant that he was no longer bound completely to the ripples of causality. So that's why he had more agency within his story to do what he does. However, like a fish that jumps out of a pond, it can jump, or a river, he can jump out of that river, but he will go back into the river of causality. In comparison to Goblin Slayer, where the trauma and how he decides to deal with his trauma does not affect causality in a sense, because although causality isn't a big topic in Goblin Slayer, the concept of time and how Goblin Slayer chooses to deal with his trauma and the time he puts into it is something that won't affect causality as a whole, in comparison to fighting the demons, which are more an integral part of their world. Because, like, for example, if we know that gods are real in the world of Goblin Slayer, and if something happened where the gods were specifically involved within Goblin Slayer's story, and Goblin Slayer was fighting against the gods, and the goblins were, in some sense of the word, like minions of the gods, it would parallel Guts' story more. However, because of the fact that goblins aren't related to the concept of causality and escaping causality like in Berserk, it feels like Goblin Slayer is more static in comparison to Guts, who's more dynamic. However, I think the themes of Berserk with causality affect that more. Right. And I don't think either of them are like, I don't think Goblin Slayer is a less character because he doesn't deal with the theme of causality. However, I feel that how he chooses to move on and keep doing what he does speaks more to a character that didn't have the luxury to escape causality. If that makes sense.
Right, and that's actually what we're trying to talk about right now, because in terms of what's his name, Goblin Slayer being a more static character, I want to understand, is he being a static character because because his what's it called, lack of development? Is that what we're trying to say right now?
I'm saying that, like, at the start, him being a static character is good because it sets up a good base for the reader as well as a writer. And the more we see him develop as a whole, I think is good in that regard, because of the fact that, like, it allows people to kind of have a comfortable base with a character. And then from there on, I think that how they set up a second season will help Goblin Slayer grow more dynamically as a character, and we'll see more range of what he does. Mm-hmm. But from here, I think that having a static character that is dependable in that regard is good for any reader.
Okay.
So that would be my opinion, that at this point he is still very static. However, I think static in this case is good, because I'll
give you that one.
Because I don't think dynamic characters in their own right aren't exactly always good. Because you mentioned Akame ga Kill, right?
Yes.
Akame as a character was kind of dynamic. There were some dynamic characters, however, how they were fleshed out in the sense of being dynamic characters weren't always the best.
you know what? You're actually right because as a I think I'm a pretty savage anime watcher, and what I'm used to seeing is a pretty dynamic protagonist. But in terms of Goblin Slayer, he really let his side characters do most of the speaking for him, if not leading the story a little bit more. His whole point was pretty much to direct them in terms of where they're heading next, what their goals are. But they kind of filled in all the other blanks, such as adding personality to their group. Because as the show went on, Goblin Slayer's party became more aware of how to fight goblins, what it meant to be a team. They got more trust. Goblin Slayer was becoming even closer with the priestess, and even at the final episode, he admits that the reason why he was okay with only him and her going after the Goblin Lord is because he trusted her to be the one to have his back, and that's not something he would have done, like you said before, at the beginning of the series. Even
Yeah.
him admitting that he needed help from the other adventurers was a big step forward for him because he's used to saying, you know what, whether you go with me or not, I'll do it by myself. He could have said that this time around as well, but because of his development over the series, he's actually saying, you know what, let me put my pride aside and give into the situation.
Essentially, like if we're gonna go back to Berserk again,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think like a really good kind of comparison would be what if, for instance, Guts had the Berserk armor at the start of the series? Like, just imagine that. If he had the Berserk armor at the start of the series and he was using it over and over again to fight demons at the start of the series, and you started meeting these characters continually as the series progressed, and then to the point that what's the Ruby Dragon's name that he fights when he first uses the Berserk armor? Grimdall, I think his name is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like if, for instance, if he stopped using the Berserk armor less at that point, I think that's a similar arc to what happens with Goblin Slayer, where we see Goblin Slayer at this point where he has a lot of power within his series. However, the more challenges he faces, the harder it gets, and the more he's willing to trust people and not just rely on his own strength. Because a good scene is where when he's fighting Grimdall and he sees a few apostles going to attack Casca,
Yeah.
he instead stops his fight and goes over to fight them and save Casca, and then he reveals his face, which is where we see the change and the growth, which I think is similar to how Goblin Slayer is as a character. It's like if he had the Berserk armor and was going through the series and had to grow more as a person and then less as a fighter,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a lot different from other characters where they grow as people and as fighters.
But this show only focuses on the character himself.
Yeah. And it's also the opposite of something like Overlord, where we see Ainz as a character. Ainz grow as a character in his world instead of as a fighter because
He's already the strongest as he needs to be.
he's already super strong.
Right.
And it's completely just growing as a character because Ainz doesn't face any challenges at all because everything just goes, quote unquote, according to plan.
Right.
And I think also another thing is that static characters aren't necessarily bad because even like short stories and novellas as a whole usually have static characters as their protagonists because of the nature of where they're at. They do what they can with the length they have, and I think because of the fact that Goblin Slayer this only adapts like half of the manga, I think that the slow transition from static to quasi dynamic to fully dynamic near the end of the series, I think is really good.
Okay.
I'll give you like that you made some like points that so I look at Goblin Slayer a little bit differently than I did before. I still feel like it's very shallow in some of its themes or some of its points that it tries to go at. But I do give you that I didn't really think about how Goblin I keep the fact that I have to say Goblin Slayer because that's his name
And
that makes me really mad.
I even when I usually just call him Gobby.
Gobby.
That's
how
worse.
he has, he is not the same character as we saw in episode 1. He's less of a loner now. Yeah. So I
think another thing that people have like don't think about with Goblin Slayer is that the antagonists who are the goblins, there isn't really any moral relativism to the goblins. Like comparing them to any of Berserk's enemies, almost every single one of the Berserk enemies had some kind of moral relativism to them. While in the case of all the goblins, they are completely repugnant, which I think is refreshing in my opinion because in a lot of postmodern media, we see a lot of more relativism and less of black and white, good and bad. And I
Right.
think that it's really refreshing to see a character who may be doing something out of malintent, where he's just doing it out of revenge and kind of murderous obsession. However, what he's doing is good, which you could say is morally relative, but there is a black and white to almost every layer of what he does, which I think is one of the most refreshing things about the series, where there is a good, there's a bad, and I think that it's a breath of fresh air compared to like a lot of the moral relativism we see in a lot of postmodern media, anime included.
So you feel like everything's trying to make everything gray, and now it's a breath of fresh air that everything's not. Well, in this show, it's more black and white.
It's a lot more black and white, less gray, and
So
I don't
feel
think
like it's more
gray's
interesting
bad.
when it's not black and white though. I feel like there's more to talk about when there's more things to go into when it's more gray, especially in the Lost Children arc of Berserk. That was the arc where it got more like
That was nice.
Yeah.
Was nice.
that arc was crazy because it was like killing little children, but they're like, I don't know, they're like monsters at the same time. But it's weird.
I think the fact is that like there's when you talk about moral grays, there is more to talk about. However, in some cases, if you analyze a gray topic for long enough, you will come to a black or white decision on some things from certain perspectives. And whether people agree with those assessments or not, it will come down to data in some cases. However, in terms of stories, like for example, with the Black Swordsman arc and the fight with the Count, there is a lot less gray in the first few like instances of Berserk. Because first we see Guts kill a obvious monster. Of course, obviously he's boning it first, and we see him tell the guys to bring the Count, fight the Count, and we obviously see the fact that there's nothing really redeemable about the Count. Like, and I'm talking about not the Count, the Snake Baron. My mistake.
Right,
I want to get the Count. There's nothing redeemable about the Snake Baron, and I think that the fact that how Berserk set it up, being less gray, is really good. And it was very black and white because Snake Baron bad, Guts good, and even if like his mannerisms could be considered kind of rude, abrasive, but there is a lot of black and white in like his first buildings of his character, because we understand that like what happened to him was objectively terrible, and it's only until the Golden Age arc and the Lost Children arc where those grays start to become more apparent. However, in terms of Goblin Slayer, a lot of this more black and white helps you think less about was this morally the right thing to do, and more of what could have been done in a different situation under different circumstances for the betterment of something. It's more of a statistical debate than a philosophical debate, which I think fills a different niche for different people, I guess.
I see what you're saying. Also, well, I think Berserk got a little bit more started getting a little bit more morally gray earlier on, because we start getting some backstory on it's not the Count actually during not the Golden Age, but the first Black Swordsman arc.
Yeah, the end of the Black Swordsman arc, I think.
Near the end. That's when I think he started like figuring out where he wanted Berserk to start to flow as a whole story. But our time is running short. But I do appreciate like your insight, because you actually made me look at Goblin Slayer a little bit at a different angle than I previous was looking at it.
Thank you very much.
I do want to make a quick transition in terms of the animation, because we had a couple things we wanted to say about it.
Oh yeah, the animation. It was ups and downs. There's literally a part you said you caught that his mouth.
Yeah, Goblin Slayer was talking. His mouth just didn't move.
When his mask was off.
Right.
Oh really?
And I was laughing about that. And
I think you know how like there's a lot of like CGI in modern animation. Even once again going to Berserk, the 2016 anime.
Oh God.
Don't talk about that. We don't talk about that.
We don't talk about that anime.
Like actually looking at Guts, how he walks in that anime compared to how Goblin Slayer walks, I think the CGI animation works better for Goblin Slayer than it does for Berserk, because of how kind of stoic and somber Goblin Slayer is. That mechanical walk works for him better. Yeah. And I think that as the series is going to progress, they're going to use less and less CG animation for all these characters, which I hope, because of how Goblin Slayer changes. But I think for most of the animation, I really liked a lot of the animation. Some of the stills they did, like the still at the end of episode 11 when he comes out of the trees with a red eye and stuff. Those are some really nice scenes in it. And it actually reminds me of when the Berserk armor changed in the 2016 anime and you see the mouth open. Those, they compare so well. And I think that, like, for a character, that was the one thing I'll have to say with Guts and the Goblin Slayer is that how they're animated with similar styles, it worked better for Goblin Slayer and less for Guts. And that's because of the character that Goblin Slayer was. But
I agree with
yeah.
that. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of animation was during the last 2 episodes when they were doing those anime battles, with the Goblin champions, the animation quality spiked for like a moment, and I'm just like, why are you guys trying to put so much emphasis on this one moment?
It's the season finale, bro.
Yeah, they gotta go for the finale.
Yeah, I do it for the season finale.
As well as they also got a little bit of extra budget because of the recap episode that you guys didn't really like. So that was another thing that happened, was because of the fact that they did that little recap, which everyone hated. It gave them a little bit extra budget to work on that ending.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, that's pretty much all we really had to talk about. Is there anything else you want to include?
What I would tell anyone if they want to get into Goblin Slayer more, if they like it or they want to get more into it, I really recommend you guys read the manga. Also, read Goblin Slayer Year 1. That is actually his backstory. There's a manga and there's a light novel to that, so you get to see some of his earlier escapades as a fighter. So we get to see him struggle more. His character stays relatively the same, but we see his connection with Cowgirl more, and we understand how they came to be together and all of that. So I recommend anyone read Goblin Slayer, the main one, and then read the side story Year 1. Anything else, if you really like the series, read it, but it's not really that relevant.
Okay.
Well,
gotcha.
Well, thanks a lot, man. You definitely made me think it's a little less shitty than before.
A little less.
Listen, I'm still not a fan of it. I'll tell you that. But listen, after his points, I'll admit I don't hate it as much as I did this morning.
Yeah.
But
I will convert you guys eventually. Trust me. Once we get season 2, I will convert you guys fully.
You think it's actually going to get season 2?
I think so. From how everyone really enjoyed the series and how refreshing it was and how well it stayed up on the charts, I think it's going to get a season 2. I don't know when, but if there's enough fanfare, I know the next anime convention that's going to be happening in our area, I'm going to be picking up more of the manga because I had to read some of the later stuff online because I wasn't selling it at my store. So I'm going to be picking up mangas. I'm going to be picking up the first season because that should be finished, ready, and being sold by that time. So I'm going to be supporting as much as I can because I want to see another season because more people can see how the characters develop and they're going to like the story more because it's going to be a little bit more traditional in that sense.
Okay. Well, if that does happen, we look forward to having a second podcast with you, man.
Why, thank you very much.
All right. Well, that's all we have, folks. Like, comment, subscribe, and check out Z's channel. You want to tell us what it is again?
Zimzilla99. That is my channel, guys. I hope you enjoy what I do there.
Yes, sir. And that's all. Have a good day, everybody, and have a happy new year.
Yep. 2019, here we go.
Peace, bro.